Okay, so another sort of rant video. Um, and this one I kind of just want to talk. I'm going to do a series, but it's just going to be, basically about the importance of genes and sort of why that matters. Uh, you know, and I might show a couple graphs or like some data, but you know, my first couple videos is gonna be low effort. When I start seeing some subs, I'll start putting more effort. But for now, I'm just going to say what I think are interesting things. Um, but yeah, so with society, we kind of think, well, society is basically, it's a cultural construct. It's formed over the course of like hundreds of years with knowledge sort of being built upon itself. That you record something and then you pass it down to the next generation and so on and so forth. Which is true to an extent, but like, it's obviously not just that because, you know, uh, a group of chimpanzees can't do that, you know, and so, and why? Why can't they do that? Well, it's because they're not intelligent enough. They're too violent and too impatient to write anything down, and also they're not going to, physically really be able to do so just because they don't have dexterous hands. So it's a bunch of reasons, but uh, even if you gave chimps the ability to do so, they still wouldn't do that because they lack the genetic foundation needed to engage in that kind of activity to begin with. And so with humans, they have the genes for a large, intelligent brain that is capable of sort of um, recording things and having a desire to pass that knowledge down to its offspring, and so it sort of perpetuates itself through the ages, and that's basically what we call culture. Like not exactly, but like it kinda. You're passing down traditions, values, beliefs, uh, various trades down to the next generation. And, you know, uh, this sort of, this idea that society has that it's basically entirely a construct of culture, and that, you know, the culture just exists abstractly, just sort of floating around, like that's kind of insane. Is like, it doesn't exist just randomly. It exists because you have a species with various traits that allow that culture to exist. You know, and if you start falling below a certain line on various traits, you're going to lose that culture. That culture can only be maintained if it if the population that has it has the right traits to maintain said culture. You know. So it's going to be well, so it's obviously an important, well, it should be a obvious thing that genes are important, but there's some problems with saying that. It's like it's it's basically a fact. It's basically, a verifiable truth, but it's such a uncomfortable statement that that genes matter, which is obvious, but that's so uncomfortable for people because it opens up just Pandora's box. It's a huge, it's a titanic can of worms that people don't want to get into, and you know, to kind of not beat around the bush too long. It's both race, but also sex a little bit, and also uh, slightly religion, but only because, well, it's a little bit religion, but not that important. Uh, but then also, it's sort of even bigger than that because it's also just individuals, it's just people that are individually different, and it's like no parent wants to say, oh, you know, kid A is just smarter than kid B. Parents don't like saying that. And for, obvious reasons, because you're kind of just saying, well, this kid is turned out better and is just sort of better. Even if that may not be true, you know, but that's how it's perceived. And, well, that's just something that people are going to have to get over. They're not going to. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I don't, I'm not, like, naive to this. Like, the chances that people are going to sort of, accept the harsh truths of reality and deal with things like, race and religion and genes, it's like, it's not gonna happen, basically, They don't have the genes that would enable them to deal with that in a real way on a grand scale for like a long period of time. So, yeah. But, just speaking sort of hypothetically, you know, if you were to sort of, introduce these concepts and tell people why they matter, why, the average IQ of your nation is like super important, like that could potentially have a positive effect on like policies that sort of enable people to, you know, um, do things that are going to benefit the nation in the long run. But like, you look at welfare, if you don't understand the importance of genes, you would think that welfare is basically just a good thing. But once you understand that what you're actually doing is just selecting for low IQ, because they're totally taken care of, and the high IQ people that actually have money, they're the ones that are having to pay for this welfare. And so, uh, and there's tons of examples like that where, and it's not just what's being selected for. Like, it's not so much that if you're low IQ, you're advantaged, but it's more of if, you know, you look at the average, yeah, quote unquote low income house, which is going to, be a proxy for IQ, you know, um, you'll see that they're having way more kids. And this is sort of, well, it's not totally independent of race, but it's lower IQ whites are having more kids than high IQ whites, and lower IQ blacks are having more kids than, higher IQ blacks. And so it's sort of independent of race, although there's still differences there. Um, but yeah, a better example would actually be Latinos because, blacks and whites are actually like their rates are pretty similar in terms of, their reproduction rate, um, but yeah, like Latinos and Arabs are like real, they're real high, but uh, yeah. So where was I? So you basically have a difference in sort of the reproduction rate between these different IQ groups. So even though the environment isn't like favoring low IQ, it's uh they're just woefully outbreeding the high IQ people, and so that's going to over time have a net effect of just lowering the average IQ, and which should be obvious why that's bad. Once it drops below a certain point, you're going to start losing infrastructure. You're going to start, yeah, and I'm not saying houses won't be built or wherever, but they'll be cheaper, they'll be not as good, and you'll start having knowledge that's lost, and you'll start just rolling back society and technological innovation in general. Uh, Now, all that could be saved, but you would have to get real on genes and why they're just like they're not just important. Like people might think like, oh, that's kind of important, but whatever. No, no. Like genes are why you can have a golden retriever and it never puffs up to you and it's your friend, it's your buddy, but you couldn't do that with a wolf, right? It's not the environment in which they're raised in or whatever. Like, no, it's their genes. Okay. The golden retriever wants to be your buddy. It has a deep desire within it to be your friend. Whereas a wolf is like, I don't care what you say, like I'm in charge. This food is mine. You know, it's like I've had a golden retriever and I'll like pet him while he eats and he'll wag his tail. And I've also had a wolf, and it didn't act like that at all. Okay, very much the opposite. So these aren't, and you could say, well, humans aren't dogs, and it's like, yeah, that's true, but that's kind of it's a dumb statement. That's because they're controlled and created by the same forces that make the dog, which is its genes and its environment, but the, the environmental effects are only they're only important if they're different. Yeah, and the environmental effects don't differ significantly enough to explain the sort of variation you're seeing. It's like the two parents will raise two different kids, but they'll have totally different life outcomes. They'll be different heights, different weights, look different, act different, sound different. Yeah, and it's not just because they're raised differently. They're raised in the same households. The parents themselves will tell you, we raised them the same way, okay, but they're turning out different because they have different genes. Okay, this is deeply affecting their anatomy and everything about them. And and uh, this idea that humans are special because we have culture. It's like, no, like why would that, be the case? We have organs, we have brains, we have bones and muscles. We're not that different than other animals. Well, we're just the smartest. Yeah, and this idea that if you just teach them the right way, everything will be fine. Well, and teachers can attest to this. If they have a really, like a 70 IQ student, like they can't teach that kid that much. They can teach him some basic stuff, but they can't teach him. He's not going to be in AP calculus, okay? And it's because of his genes. Now you could say, well, there could be some prenatal environment, like the mother drinking or whatever, that could affect his development. And it's like, sure, that's true. But it could also literally just be genes because there's examples of kids turning out that way that didn't have those environments. It's that's because, you look at the bell curve, it's not just, 100 average and then it just goes on to the right perpetually. It's like, no, you have one standard deviation to the right, well, you also have one standard deviation to the left. And so people forget, we talk about people that have, 130 IQs and 145 IQs. Well, it's like people aren't talking about the people that have 70 IQs or 55 IQs. This, like, people forget how many humans are just like mentally inept, which is a lot. And it's also a lot of the homeless. That's not saying all the homeless, but like a lot of those dudes are just low IQ. They're like 70 IQ sort of people, and which explains why they're homeless. Being homeless isn't fun. It's no one's dream. You end up that way because you make bad decisions. You make bad decisions because you're not good at thinking. And so a lot of the things you see in society are, you know, a reflection of just, biological differences between individuals. That's just how things are. Now, you can educate someone, and education is important. You could take someone with like a 90 IQ, you know, raise them right, raise them to value education and to work hard. And, you could send them to a trade school where they might struggle a little bit, but they're still able to learn everything they need to learn. And then they go out and, they have a successful career and they do, very well for themselves. And that's, good. That's fine. But don't tell that kid, you know, you can, you can be, the next, I don't know, we'll go with a PC sort of person, the next Neil deGrasse Tyson, you know, um, and it's, I understand why, like, because it's not hard to see why you'd want to tell your kid, you could be anything you want, but like, there's a reality to the situation. I would like to tell my son, you can swim with crocodiles and you could just beat them up. Because that would be amazing if true, right? That would be like, oh, great. Now not, he doesn't have to worry about the physical world killing him. But like, that's not true, and teaching him that would be dangerous. It would get him killed. So I'm going to tell him, what's true, which will hurt him in the moment, but in the long run will be way better for him. He'll be able to be like, oh, okay, these are sort of my limitations. And if I'm willing to work real hard, I can push, I can push that envelope a little bit, go a little higher than sort of what my general sort of abilities would suggest, but only to a limit. Just like if you have a small dude that works out a lot, he can be, he can go from a weak man to a kind of strong man. But you're never going to have a guy that's, 5'2", 125 soaking wet, get to be as strong as Brian Shaw, who's like 6'9" and like 400 pounds or wherever. It's like, that's just not going to happen because he doesn't have the genetic foundation for it. He could get stronger. He could work out a lot and push the envelope, but he's never going to get to anything remotely competitive in like powerlifting. He's just not. Yeah. Now maybe like pound for pound strength or whatever, but like not raw strength. Yeah. And the same is true for intelligence. The same is true for basically, I mean, anything you could sort of imagine, really. There's people that are going to fit genetic profiles that will allow them to be better suited for those tasks. And if those tasks uh, dictate your survival, well, you're going to get real good at that, or that population is going to get real good at that. And that's what we call evolution, you know. And, you know, when you move to different environments, like let's say the Sahara to Norway, you're going to undergo some changes, you know, and which ties into race, which is one thing that people freak out about. And I get it, I understand. I'm not a moral monster, right? I I get why that issue is, distasteful, but it's the truth. Like, when I was younger, I was very, I was very liberal. I was very, egalitarian. I tried to explain everything with the environment, and I just kept running into the truth, which just kept, you know, just boldly telling me you're wrong. And so eventually I was going to either just be in denial or live in truth, live in reality. And I chose, the latter. So, yeah. And I think that's what needs to be done for society to improve. Like all these sort of like, oh, if we change this economic policy, blah blah blah, everything will be fine. It's like, no, it won't. Okay, no, it's not going to be fine. Okay, it doesn't like it, standing here and talking about economics or some like you know plan to deal with foreign interactions where trade deals like those things kind of don't matter. Like they matter, but like it's what matters is having the right mind, the right attitude that is going to lead you to make those good trade deals, to make those good policies. Yeah. And so you could say like, well, it's a little too, reductionist or whatever to sort of boil everything down to genes, and it's like, yeah, but like it's so important. It's literally like the most important thing in society, but it's not talked about at all. And if you do talk about it, well, then you're evil. Yeah, then you're Hitler, which is absurd, but that's how things are. And it's not, it doesn't appear to really be going anywhere because the one group that was talking about it, which was the alt-right, they basically shit the bed and sort of ruined everything for everyone else, and just sort of didn't do a good job, like at all. Yeah, it was the media against them, and you know, it's like obviously it's not all on them, but like they did not do a good job. And I'm not like a alt-righter or whatever, but I'm just saying in terms of like talking about genes and sort of potentially getting real about what's going on in society. Because here's the thing, if you try to explain everything with the environment, you end up living in a weird, strange world that has basically no predictive validity. Whereas if you include genes, not saying everything's genetic, but you include genes into the conversation, all of a sudden things start making sense. Yeah, all of a sudden you can start saying, like, oh, well, you know, it makes sense that, you know, after Japan is hit with a tornado or whatever, or a tsunami or a typhoon, the way they all sort of come together and have a very, sort of collectivist mentality, and they all work to each other, and they're, more altruistic than most other populations. Like, you could see how that attitude, because that attitude is not expressed in Haiti. It's like when they get hit, they just got hit. There's no rebuilding. Okay, whereas, in Japan, it's like they get hit, they immediately rebuild. They immediately house each other, they immediately respond to it as they should. And that is not a function of their culture or whatever. They'll go 25 years, in an area without being hit, without being told, this is what you do when blah 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 happens. But then when they are hit, they just respond. And they don't think about it. They're not passing down these values to their kids, or at least not to some great degree. Okay, they're doing that because they have the genetic foundation that enables them to respond that way. Okay, and a lot of people are gonna freak out about that, but it's true. It's and it's not like I'm like making this up. Like all these things, like especially on IQ, like all that's verifiable. Like it's you could use sort of crime rates as like a proxy for that. Like, what do you think? To go back to Haiti, what do you think the crime rates are? Think they're low? Think they're comparable to Japan? Like I'm not even going to bother like putting them up because it's like just Google it yourself. It's like it's real quick, real easy, and you'll see like, wow, that's you know, it's a big difference. Big difference. It's, to explain some things. And then but sort of going, back to like an individual level. Individuals are different. So you'll have very smart, very, you know, quote unquote well spoken, as the sort of it's a meme now, but eloquent, articulate, whatever, uh, black guys, you'll have them, and then you'll have, dumb, slow, sort of, not too friendly, you know, uh, Asians, or whites or whatever, and so, it's called the bell curve for a reason. It's like there's people on the high end, there's people on the low end, but their means are not the same, and that matters. And not just that their means aren't the same right now, but where's the trajectory going? It's like they're not going to be the same in the future. So you know, well, here they're pretty much all going to lower. Like in terms of Uh, well, I don't know about crime, although probably with the whole defund the police movement and just the sort of attitude that's out there, so they'll probably become like more criminal just because if you're a criminal and there's no cops, you're at the advantage. You're at a you're at a big advantage. But if you have laws and police, the criminals are at a big disadvantage, which is what we want. And regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of whatever, no one wants to be robbed. It doesn't matter if it's a white guy or a black guy. It doesn't matter if it's a Korean grandmother. You don't want to be robbed, okay? You don't want to have a gun pointed at you. You don't want to be raped or murdered or beaten up or whatever. And that matters. It, the genetic foundation matters in terms of all that stuff because all that is tied to genes. Now, it's not that genes sort of overtly equal that, just a golden retriever can be mean, can bite. Okay, but guess what? They are way less likely to bite than wolves or pit bulls, which would be like sort of in between, But yeah, their genes matter, and society basically needs to get over that if we're going to sort of save our civilization, which it might happen. I'm not like betting on it or whatever, but it could happen. Do I think it? Do I suspect it? Mm, probably say there's I think a 40% chance that things turn around, but which is kind of optimistic actually, but but yeah, there's a decent chance, that things could work out. But they probably won't. They probably will probably regress. Now what might end up happening is like we basically regress to the Stone Age, and then in another 10, 20,000 years, we get another shot. And maybe things work out. But that's, that's a big maybe. Yeah, like, you know, maybe things will work out. Maybe people will sort of start understanding why genes matter, and people will freak out and say, oh, "That's you're a eugenicist, you neo-Nazi, blah, 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 blah," and it's all noise because, like, one, it's like, no, you could understanding and believing in reality is not neo-Nazi or racist or whatever. It's it was kind of a fluke of history in the sense of the way sort of eugenics worked out, but the idea of selection, the idea of genes mattering, like that's so crucially important, and it's being totally slept on. Society is sleeping on genes. I think I'll make that the title. But yeah, it's a big deal. So yeah, but this is just part one. I'm going to make part two. I think when I make part two, I'll actually sort of show a little data, because this one's more of just a rant, But yeah, yep. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Uh, yeah, yeah, that'll be it for now. All right. Goodbye. I'll put a little picture up, and hopefully I get like 5 views on it or wherever. Yeah. All right. Bye.